This is DMG and welcome to DMG's lab. Can you see the dungeon wall? This video, this has already been touched on by Wylock from Wylock's Crafting Vids, but I wanted to kind of experiment with it. He told me go out and get one of these things, and so I did, and I've been messing around with it. And we're going to be talking about airbrushes. So, my limited knowledge of it. Now remember, I've never used one of these before. This is a layman's interpretation. This is for terrain building. This is not about mini painting. And this is definitely not about makeup. So if you hear about makeup, do not use any of these techniques. Right, let's get through this video. So I went out and bought a really cheap airbrush, and it also came with the compressor, the air compressor you're going to need as well. So this is a suction airbrush, so it uses one of these little cups that goes into the bottom like this, and you put your paint inside there and it gets sucked up into the airbrush once the air is passing through your air cable from the air compressor. So the air cable basically just attaches to the bottom of the airbrush like this. You can, of course, use plumber's tape to wrap around the thread on both sides if you want to. It depends on whether you're having any air escaping. So this is the air compressor I got. You can get the ones with the big tank underneath that's supposed to keep it quiet. That's not really necessary at all. It's a bit of an extra expense. You've got the little pressure gauge there that when you turn it on, it'll pump it up to the PSI that you select. I really run it between sort of 20 and 25, depending on what kind of paint flow you're wanting. Again, I've just been experimenting with this. So this is the little knob that you adjust the actual pressure with, and underneath here is the regulator, which may need to be cleared out at some point with, I think it's moisture or something that collects in there. So you get the gravity fed ones as well, which have the little thing at the top. So this would be at the top, and the gravity feeds into the airbrush, but this one obviously sucks it up. So I'm just going to remove the nib here so you can see the principles of how this works. So there's this long needle that runs through the entire shaft of the airbrush, and when you pull this little device here, it retracts the needle. So it retracts from the little hole that's in the front piece that I've unscrewed. So once that is retracted and the air is flowing through, it blasts the paint out through the front. And the further back it is, the more paint is coming through, and the further you push it down, the more air that flows through. So just by pushing it down like that, you'll just have air flowing through, coming up through the pipe, and then just blow straight out the front. And then if you pull it back, that then begins the suction, because the needle's being pulled back. That begins the suction of the paint coming from your gravity or your little bucket here, which is the wrong way around, so just turn around. So that will then, the flow of the air causes the suction, and pulling it back mixes the paint in with the air that's coming through, and that's essentially how it works. Now there's a little thing there that at the front that you can adjust how much ink is or paint is put through. Now, of course, the compressor changing the pressure will help with how much force is going to come through the airbrush. So at the back, you'll see the needle goes all the way through. You can make adjustments to the needle at the back or take it out to completely clean the entire thing. But remember, it will probably fall apart and will take some doing to get it back to working condition. So just an idea of how this actually works. So when you've got paint, you've got pigment in the paint, which is, pigment is almost like a powder that's just lots and lots and little specks of paint. More expensive pigment colors have a lot more pigment in them, and they're inside a binder. And the cheaper paints have less pigment in them and are in a cheaper binder. So the binder is typically acrylic, and so you'll have several of these molecules or globules, etc., that filled with pigment that are all stuck together because of the binder. Now, when you have cheaper paints that look quite watery, that tends to be because of the cheaper materials, or it is actually watered down, which basically creates less of a bond in the acrylic and more water in flowing through, so your pigment is kind of spread out. But we'll have a look at how that affects what it looks like. So we're going to just show a few little bits of paint here. We've got your standard thick acrylic paint. You've got your high flow acrylic, which is meant for airbrushes. So I'll just put a dollop of each of these on the cards. I'll just let this flow around so we can show you a few things with how this actually functions. And then I'm just going to put some ink on here. Ink, you say? Yes, I'll experiment with some ink. Of course, some watered down acrylic paint. So this is just the normal craft paint on the left side there. That's been heavily watered down. So you could try to put that through your airbrush if you wanted to. But you can see that it's not, the pigment is a lot less in there due to the fact that it's been watered down. Now on the ink, you'll start to see there's little bits of these little spidery legs starting to come out from the edge of the ink. And you don't really get that with the high flow acrylic, and obviously not with the acrylic paint either. So pushing this acrylic paint through the airbrush will be quite difficult. That's why it needs to be this very liquid state. The high flow is very good, or watered down. The ink is going to be a bit of a problem, but yeah, it's better to use the high flow acrylic paint. You'll see here that the ink is actually bleeding through the bottom of this cardstock. So this is why ink would probably be bad, because it's going to start to mess up something. If you're constructing it and you want to paint it on one side, you'll see the high flow acrylic doesn't actually go through. And so yeah, you're going to, any kind of porous thing, you're going to have problem. The paint in the water is just warping the card a little bit, but it's not bleeding through. So I'm just going to put some of this high flow acrylic paint into the airbrush. Now high flow acrylic paint is quite cheap when you're buying it in huge quantities. I bought, this is about a 250 ml bottle, which is about $10 Australian. At current exchange, it's about $7.50 in America. So it's probably cheaper in America as well. I won't mention the brand because it's a shop specific brand, but there will be several different brands. You can check out the links in the description below for things on Amazon where you can purchase the sort of airbrushes I found on there that could be very useful to you. So as we're now pulling back the thing, we're just showing how the spread of the airbrush actually works. And the closer you are, the darker and more focused the spray. The further away you are, the lighter and the more it sprays all over the show. Now you'll see when you're super close, you are going to get some of these residues that start to come out of the front of the nozzle. So that's what came out of the front of the airbrush there. So when you get too close, you're going to start to see this sort of artifacts appearing. So what I'm going to show you now, if you put too much force and you're too close with the airbrush, you're going to see these sort of spidery things starting to spray out. There we go. And those spidery things there, you don't want that. So you too much paint, too much force. So you're either going to adjust the pressure or take the airbrush further away. So the further away you are, the lighter the color is going to be, and you may need to make several passes in order to get the color that you're looking for. So it also helps considerably with doing gradients. So when you're wanting to do different gradients on your piece and you want to go from dark to light or light to dark, this airbrush makes it very nice and easy. And it is a wonderful effect for that. Now, several people on different channels have said it's probably best to start with light colors first and then work to dark colors. I only have black and medium gray at the moment, so that's all I've been using. But obviously more experiments to come. And then as the ink gets, or the paint gets low in the little well, you'll start to have less paint coming out when you're depressing the trigger, and so then obviously it would be time to refill the actual little paint pot that you've got in there. So gravity ones obviously will come through the top, this one will come through the bottom. So the suction one may have more paint left in it, so you may need to wiggle it around a bit to get the paint back into there to get sucked up into the nozzle. Again, this is a super cheap airbrush. More expensive ones will have different sort of things, but they all work on the same principles. So in order to clean this out now, so you're going to get a lot of paint and gunge that's been sucked up into there. I'm now using a mixture of Windex, isopropyl alcohol at 70%, and water. So I just about, you can get different ratios, different people tell you different ratios, but essentially I just plug that into the bottom and I'm just spraying it right through, so you can see the paint starting to dissipate. Now, of course, this is one way of doing it. I suggest that you wear a mask when you're doing this, but you can use one of these little pot cleaner things. So these are super cheap. I got this for about $5 on eBay. They don't need to be super fancy, but again, you just hold the airbrush in there, pull back the trigger, and blast through the mixture into this pot. You can see there's no paint coming out now. So the last thing to do, I've got this one that's just filled with water, and I'll plug that in because we're going to just back blast just to make sure there's nothing stuck in the pipes. So we block the end with something and pulled back the trigger and push down hard, and you'll see that it's starting to bubble in there. You may not be able to see it, but there is a little bit of black paint coming in there. And once that's no longer coming through, you can stop and detach the water, and you just spray out the excess water so there's not left inside the airbrush when you've finished. So that's pretty much most of what we're going to cover today. So when you're finished, just turn off the compressor, hold down the button to release the excess air, and then double check your needle to make sure that there's no paint all over it or ink or whatever you've been using. So this one looks relatively clean. You can also check the front nozzle to make sure that that is all clear and the hole is not blocked, because that will cause a huge problem. Now some of these, this one obviously is a fixed hole. There are some that actually open up when you twist it, so it's like a grabber. So you get different types of these, and you're going to have different methods of cleaning it. So the grabber ones kind of open up when you unspool it, but this one is just a fixed pipe. So it depends on the airbrush that you've got. And yeah, just be sure to clean it every single time. These things will get gunged up, and just put whatever protective cap may come across. So here is the watered down paint, and just so you can see that how the pigment has been spread out by the water, as I talked about, and whereas the high flow, it's still not dry yet, but at least you're getting the thick color that you were in this. And of course with the normal acrylic paint, there's no problem there at all. So that's airbrushing. I hope you enjoyed this video, and in the next DMG's Lab we're going to talk about a little bit of a concoction for revitalizing your cheap brushes that you bought. You know, when you forget to clean the things and then they're all gunged up, this is what's going to help you out. So if you like this video, hit the like button. Consider supporting the channel by going to the DMG info/store and check out all the other channels in the Tabletop Crafters Guild, the DM's Craft, Wildhouse Crafting Vids, and of course Black Magic Craft. How can we forget Jeremy? Of course, there's my latest video up here that you can check out. There's one that YouTube recommends, and over here is where you can subscribe to this channel, and there's one of my other channels down below where you can stay in the DMG universe, where all things are crazy and weird. But, you know, you've got to click on one of them.